Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
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 I will be Hamid, acting as chair for a call for the addition virtual residential manufactured structural board meeting of September 16 to order at 9:30. Lisa, please call the roll, please.
Mr. Acting Chair, Rebai Temer Halet.
Present.
Gordon Anslow.
I'm here.
James Austin. James Austin. Forrest Barnes, excused. John Camiller. John Camiller. John Camiller, can you hear us? John Camiller.
Here.
Thank you. Rich Fry.
I'm here.
Emily Kemper.
Here.
Douglas Lathine.
Here.
Rich Tover.
Here.
Eli Bollum.
Here.
Mr. Acting Chair, we have a quorum. Do you have any comment or discussion on the agenda and the order of the business? Okay, I hear none. Acting the chair, rule of the agenda and the order of business approved. The next item is the approval of the draft meeting of the notice of the last meeting, July 8, 2020. Do you have any comment or discussion? I hear none. Acting chair will be to hold the draft meeting notes of July 8, 2020 final. The next meeting will be October 7th, 2020. Next item is in the agenda is the public comments. Staff, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have received requests for public comment in this meeting, but they're all related to agenda item 7A, so we're going to address them at that point in the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item is program update, residential structures. I give the floor to Tony Rocco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Just a brief program update for the board. The 2021 ORSC Technical Committee appointed by this board wrapped up their work just late last month. There were 3 full days of committee meetings with a lot of public testimony and involvement. Only a limited number of changes on the structural design fire life safety side, and there are specific changes in chapters 11 and 15 regarding energy and ventilation. Clarifications and improved language throughout the code, which we're excited about. And the committee recommendations are planned to be heard at your October 7th meeting. Our technical team looks forward to continuing on in the process. And finally, we have a big announcement. We're pleased to announce the division has a new interim advisor or interim administrator. beginning October 1, and that is Alana Cox. And Alana is here. Alana, you want to say a couple of things for the board?
Sure, thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. I think some of you know me already as the Policy and Technical Services Manager, so I've been working with the boards for a while. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm looking forward to working with you in a new role going forward, and really thank you for all of your time volunteering. Code adoption is a big ask as it is with the COVID on top of it and remote meetings. We're really thankful for all of your time, including at this extra scheduled meeting. So I really appreciate it and look forward to working with you all going forward.
That's all we had for the update, Mr. Chairman. So I'll turn it over back to you unless there's any questions.
Any questions from the board? Next item is communication. None. We have none. Item 4, the appeal. We have none. And number 6, unfinished business. We have none. And number 7 is the new business. We have 3 items in this meeting, and I will have Andy introduce the item A.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Andy Bolton. As Tony mentioned, we had a code committee that worked through August, and as part of that looked at the solar ready provisions and they have made some recommendations, and I'm going to actually let Tony discuss the technical details of them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Again, looking at agenda item 7A regarding solar ready, and as Andy kind of set up here, and as the memo clearly identifies, Executive Order 1720 is kind of the origin of this agenda item before you. The original code amendment proposal brought to this board on July 8th required all new homes to include a conduit raceway to facilitate the wiring of a future solar installation. The board tabled that discussion and tasked the appointed code committee with pursuing it in more detail through their process. The board also recommended at that July 8th meeting that the committee consider the model code appendix that was discussed during the meeting. The technical committee recommendation before you can be summarized and simplified by identifying 3 major components. So we talked about the raceway, or that pathway, from the July 8th meeting. The appendix expands on that. So there's space, not capacity, but space in the electrical panel. The same conduit pathway that was discussed at the July 8th meeting that was proposed previously. And then the third item is identification of a roof area on construction documents when it's applicable in the proposed design. Some general cost figures have been identified previously, and we would welcome a robust board discussion regarding the associated fiscal impact. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 oral testimony requested. We have Angela from Executive Director, Oregon Solar Energy, and we have Mike Goodrich from Oregon Home Builder Association, and we have Jeni Hall, Program Manager, Advanced Solar Energy Trust of Oregon. I think we go with Angela first. And Tony, is there a time limit for this? Is it like a 3 minutes or 5 minutes?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is 5 minutes.
Okay, go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Angela Crowley-Koch. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Solar Energy Industries Association, and we appreciate your consideration of this important issue. I'm here to testify that we are disappointed in the current draft of the solar ready provisions. At the last meeting of the technical committee, the provision put forward did have some changes from what was discussed at the previous meeting of the technical committee. Was significantly modified and condensed. And unfortunately, condensing several sections of that model Appendix T into a single section made it confusing to understand. And in addition, it eliminated an important exception and included a revision to exempt all small projects that don't have 600 square feet of contiguous roof area. We'd like to propose to you that the Energy Trust of Oregon did submit technical comments and suggestions to the committee, including a template for solar-ready code language, which is based on their expertise. And that language, I think, was more clear and more in line with industry standard and did not increase burden for home builders. In addition, it was just more clear. And so we would appreciate if the board would consider going back to previous suggestions that the technical committee made and to consider the technical suggestions from the Energy Trust of Oregon. And I believe that Jeni Hall with the Energy Trust will be testifying after me and can talk about those technical suggestions. Thank you.
Do you have any questions to Angela?
I don't have any questions for Angela yet, but I might later.
Okay,
Angela, if you could stick around.
Then we go to the next, Gordon? Mike, is it Mike?
Yes, it's me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the board for hearing me this morning. My name is Mike Goodrich. I am representing the Oregon Home Builders Association. I'm a home builder of 30 years or so in Oregon, and recently started doing just a little bit of work with OHBA on codes on the side. I also participated in the technical committee that provided the recommendation for Appendix U. The Oregon Home Builders Association appreciates the testimony earlier that the code as written is confusing. We agree with that. There's some issues there that we think would lead to unequal enforcement statewide, and they could contribute to significant delays and confusion in enforcement, as well as misperceptions from homeowners as to what the proposal would actually provide for them. We're concerned about the lack of a clear proponent on it and the lack of a clear cost impact statement. We're concerned about the code with the understanding that it's a result of the executive order, but that the code is creating preference or support for a particular product or industry. And we're concerned that it applies to homes statewide, regardless of the uptake of the technology in the future, creating a burden on future Oregonians or new Oregonian homeowners that may choose at some point not to uptake the technology in the future, yet will incur those costs. The Oregon Home Builders, in general, urges the board to consider reverting to the division's proposal of N 1107.4, and I have submitted written testimony to that with some more details along those lines, and will be certainly available for questions if you're near forthcoming. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Do you have any questions for Mike? Okay, go ahead, Jeni, the next.
Hi, am I coming through?
Yes.
Great. Phew. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. My name is Jeni Hall. I'm a program manager and technical lead for the solar program at Energy Trust of Oregon. Energy Trust of Oregon is an independent nonprofit and does not advocate any particular policy positions. I need to make sure that everybody's aware of that. The information that I provided to support today's discussion on the Solar Ready Code Appendix is based on our subject matter expertise and in an effort to support the board as you're working through this topic. The suggested changes I've shared with the board here are focused on clarifying the requirements in order to provide value to home builders, home buyers, and solar installation contractors by ensuring that Oregon Solar Ready homes will qualify for solar incentive programs both through Energy Trust and the Oregon Department of Energy that are available in the state, and that they will have decreased solar installation costs in the future. I attempted to simplify the discussion by creating a Word document that showed the original IRC Solar Ready Code Appendix as a base and tracked the changes and included comments where the Oregon version could differ. In that document that I emailed out to each of the board members, and a version of that was included as a PDF with this much more streamlined version. In the document that I sent out to each of the board members, where BCD's proposed changes it shows BCD's proposed changes, and where there was a difference with our suggested changes based on our experience within the industry. We kind of added some comments in there to show what the difference was. I'm happy to talk through this section line by line, if that's helpful, or support the discussion in any way today.
Thank you, Jenny. A member of the board, do we have any questions to?
I have questions for everybody.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So Jenny, I don't think you're allowed to say whether you like the proposal or not, but you've provided us with some alternate language, right? You've provided.
I did provide some suggestion changes.
Okay, so I'm not going to force you to say whether you like it or not, but Angela doesn't like it and Mike doesn't like it, right? Nobody likes the proposal.
That's correct. We could definitely use some improvements.
Okay.
Yes.
But Angela and Mike, you kind of have different reasons why, you brought forth different reasons why you disagree with the proposal, the proposed Appendix U that's on the table, right?
Correct, for the most part.
Okay. Mike, just out of curiosity, because you were on the subcommittee, right?
Uh-huh.
Is this substantially different than what was recommended coming out of the subcommittee?
This is fairly close to what was recommended coming out of the subcommittee.
Okay.
And for clarity, it came out on a non-unanimous vote.
I see. Okay. All right. Angela, do you know, and pardon me, part of my confusion here is that there's several different names for the portion of the code that we're talking about here. So I think what we landed on is that what is proposed is Appendix U. I think at one point it might have been called Appendix T. And then Mike, what you're saying, or what you're suggesting is that the better proposal is reverting to N1107.4, correct? It might be frozen. Angela, do you know what N1107.4 is?
I do not. I don't know exactly what he's referring to. But just to clarify, the discussion the technical committee had on August 3rd, to my understanding, the proposal that the committee ended up voting on, to my ears, did not reflect what happened at the end of the conversation of the committee on August 3rd. That was the discrepancy for me.
Okay. All right. Mike, are you back?
Through the chair, if I could.
Oh, yeah,
I believe that the N11074 is just going back to the raceway. So if I believe that that's the recommendation of the OHBA.
Through the chair, Tony or somebody, can you confirm that? Anybody know? Andy, do you know?
Yes, thank you through the chair. This is Tony Rocco with the division. That's correct. So that would be
Okay.
that section reference and 11074, that was from the July 8th meeting. It was in that July 8th packet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair, if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to wax poetic here for a second. I understand, I think we're up against a time constraint here, correct? I believe that this is something that we're supposed to have locked up by October 1st because of the executive order, and that's why we're having the special meeting. Isn't that correct? Mark came on and he's nodding. Okay, great. So if I may just clarify, I think we're in a bit of a tough spot if everybody agrees that the proposal that's on the table isn't adequate to meet the needs of the solar ready provisions that's on our code. And to be clear, I don't have a strong feeling. This is not my area of expertise. I would prefer to defer to the experts on this. And having read through it, I understand your guys' concerns. So with that said, I would again revert back to the experts and ask, Mike, understanding that you have said that N1107.4 represents a more reasonable proposal from your perspective, have you looked at Jeni's suggestions, and is that also potentially a reasonable proposal on the table?
I just saw those this morning. Can you hear me again, by the way?
Yes.
I did think out there for a while. I just looked over those this morning, and I've not had a full chance to review those.
Understood. All right, I'll stop talking for a second. Does anybody else have any other questions or thoughts?
This is John Camiller. This is John Camiller, and I do have a question. Is it possible, Debbie, for you to send out the N1107.4? Because I don't think it was included in any of the information that was provided for this meeting. Or if it was, can you at least direct me to it so I can see what it is that Mike is specifically talking about?
Yes, we will send that out right now.
Okay. And then one other thing I would like to say is that I'd like to remind people on the board, and perhaps explain to new people on the board, that, I don't know, maybe it was 12 months ago, 18 months ago, we spent several sessions going through the code, looking for ways to make houses less expensive. And we addressed several items to do with loft and things like that were specifically directed towards tiny houses so that we could make housing more affordable in Oregon. And the way I see this at this point is that the governor has created an expectation that we're going to move all housing in the direction of incorporating solar, and in anticipation of that, making anything built after a certain time more accessible for solar. But I would remind you that in doing that, anything we do is going to create additional costs, which is something that we spent quite a bit of time 18 months ago, whenever that was. Perhaps someone could remind me, trying to figure out a way to make things less expensive. So I'm only interested in doing things that eliminate or reduce the addition of solar preclusions, if that's even a word. I don't want to preclude adding solar, but I'm not interested in adding costs just so it's less expensive going forward on solar. I mean, the reality is that if you put a conduit through to above the insulation in the attic, you should be able to connect onto that conduit and to run it anywhere in the attic space that you need to put it through for solar. And same thing where it comes through in the wall down below. It doesn't have to come to the panel. We don't have to create the size of the panel being bigger. I mean, we created in this cost reduction, we talked about houses that were 600 square feet. I guarantee you that we're going to have to add space in the panel that would service a 600 square foot house. I just am not in support of creating obligations for everybody that comes into Oregon, so that a few people, it can be less expensive for a few people. Let's eliminate things that preclude there from being solar, but let's not add a whole bunch of costs to everybody. That's antithetical, if you will, to other goals that we have in the state. I will give it back to you.
I have a question to Jeni. This is Ravi. Did you take your proposal to the code committee for the Appendix D?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I brought essentially a more wordy version of this proposal to the technical review committee due to my own limitations in understanding how to engage with this process and understanding how the information is transmitted. The information that was provided to the technical review committee, the way that it was PDF'd, did not have the level of detail that I went to here for the board, and so it is my feeling that the committee was not able to have a full discussion about kind of each of the different items that I identified as being challenges. Some of those items go specifically to, I believe it was John who was just talking to concerns that John has about impacts on smaller houses because of the way that the language was written. The original IRC had some exceptions that kind of got pulled out, unfortunately. And so including some exceptions, and including those exceptions, and as well as some other items to clarify, we weren't able to have that discussion with the technical review committee.
Are you talking about the shaded exception, the shaded rules?
So the original IRC appendix has 3 exceptions that are allowed. Either you can be installing solar at the time of construction, and so you don't need to also build it solar ready. You do not need to build your home solar ready if the roof area is too small, or if because of because of orientation reasons, for instance, you have a north-facing shed roof for other reasons, you do not need to build your home solar ready. And then the third reason is if the site is shaded due to no fault, no control of the builder. If there are reasons off-site that are causing shade, then the home does not need to be built solar ready. Those are the 3 exceptions that the IRC has built in.
And the proposal has only one exception?
BCD's, the Building Codes Division's proposed language has one exception that's explicitly called out in that first section for installing solar at the time of construction. There's another exception a little farther down that talks a little bit about the roof size, but adds in some additional language about having a contiguous roof area, and is a little less clear than the IRC's version.
I have another question to the BCD staff about the cost. if there's any study about the cost, adding to, same thing question to Mike. If you know, what is the cost for, you know, 1,500 square foot home, you can add to the cost by you having these items.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. There have been some discussions about the cost. Again, identifying those three things at the appendix. Two of them are more tangible, right? More tangible costs. And that is the space, not capacity, but space within the panel. And then that pathway up into the attic space, or you have the option to make a roof penetration, cap roof penetration. And in my discussions with our electrical chief, it sounds like around $400 installed for those two elements. The third element is identifying, basically identifying something on a construction document for submittal. So again, that's a little bit more of an intangible, something that maybe the board could discuss as far as appropriate fiscal to attach to that portion of it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could. Rich Fry.
Okay.
Yes, through the chair. You know, I believe that the issue of affordability is a very big issue. I know that I'm a developer, and the cost of lots has gone up dramatically over the last 12 months, which figures into your per square foot price. And I know that we're looking at these three items: the raceway, the room in the panel, and then the area on the roof is to be clear of any other obstructions. And when I look at that, that to me is one of the scariest things, having the roof clear. If you do a fireplace, if you do venting for your stove or microwave or any of those other things, if you have to have an area on the roof that's clear and you have to reroute those to a different area of the roof, that's going to add considerable cost. And I think that there are a lot of other things like that that were not taken into consideration at this point as far as being the cost. And it's having developed quite a few subdivisions over the years, and I go back through those subdivisions, I don't see a lot of those homes with solar on them at this point in time, and I know that that's a goal, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, why would we add a bunch of costs to all of the homes when there are relatively few homes at this point that are using solar? And, you know, if we could get the price of solar down, I would be 100% in charge of it, 100% in favor of this, but I don't see that happening. And so that would be one of my concerns, that I believe that there are a lot of hidden costs that were not taken into consideration at this point in time. Thank you.
Through the chair, this is Ty Bolam. I have some thoughts and got some questions too. First off, I just want to say thank you to all the committee members and folks who have offered public comment. It's been a lot of hours. I was mentioned earlier, but these guys spent a lot of time debating, and I went through. They spent the time talking about it, so I went through and I watched it, and I read everything that was submitted. So we appreciate all that time and effort put into providing good information to the board. The way I see it, you know, back to the executive order, it says the building code to require all newly constructed buildings will be ready for the installation of solar panels and related technologies. I think we're kind of bumping up against everyone kind of trying to interpret what that means. And in my mind, at a minimum, for a building to be ready to install solar panels, most of them are going to go on the roof. So we need to make some sort of concession and consideration for how that's going to go on the roof. That's where I have the issue with the initial N1107.4 proposal that only had a raceway and no accommodation for a roof. If it was going to be a really bare bones minimum thing, I think we need to be thinking about how we get it on the roof. We are dealing with an executive order, so we need to figure out some way to make this happen. I think we also need to think that, you know, we're building these houses to last 100 years. You know, solar might not get put on for 50, 60 years. Maybe it'll be very low cost. We're just trying to make it cheaper, more accessible, easier at some point in time. I like where we're at in terms of having the range of proposals from the N1107.4, the initial one that the home builders is supportive of, all the way up to the Energy Trust one. And the points of difference are kind of bookended. What we have in front of us from the Building Codes Division was presented by the committee that, though not unanimous, which I would not expect, that was the majority consideration that I think lands pretty nicely in the middle. I do feel like we're rushed a little bit, like Emily said, with the executive order. The questions I have in a minute maybe will help us address that as well. But overall, I'm feeling kind of good that we're in the middle of where builders and the Home Builder Association are, and best practice, optimal solar practices are. So in general, I'm pretty, and along with the committee recommendation, I'm fairly happy with where we're at. I think we do need to hammer out some details. One point was both the home builders' feedback and the solar industry feedback was about obstructions and not clarifying what that means. And there's some really good language that was proposed, I think, in Jeni's comments about defining that. That was one of the points that Mike put in his letter too. So that was one issue. There's a couple little technical things I think we need to talk about before approving anything. But it does come back to cost. I don't know that we've had really good, I appreciate what Tony just shared. In the committee matrix, it said something like $1,000. So now those are the two pieces of information I've seen. Go back to the executive order. Again, this was pointed out from the home builders. Section 6, analysis of cost. And this gets to my question. It says that the state agencies are directed to adopt cost analysis tool through a process. Go to the cost analysis tool to determine whether any directive in this executive order should be deferred to the next building code cycle due to significant costs at time of implementation. So my first question is, have these costs been analyzed through this tool, the cost analysis tool? And if so, is the board comfortable pushing them through at this point in time with COVID, fire, national election coming up, just a lot of uncertainty? So I'm wondering if we need to look at cost a little bit, and maybe that's the avenue that we use to punt this a little bit to at least to the April 1st code cycle, where we can hash out a little bit more of these details.
Through the chair, I think Eli makes some really good points. I feel ill-equipped to make a decision at this point because I have not seen any data on costs of any of this. We have, again, the expert opinion about changes that need to be made, and certainly I think that we can have that discussion about revisions and clarifications that need to be made in the proposed code, but I still don't feel like we have any information on what the actual costs of this are, and I don't feel equipped to make a decision at this time.
I have another question to DCD staff. Can you share some idea why the exceptions related to the shaded roof was not taken into consideration?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, Tony Rocco with the division. So the model code included some language in there that has to do with directionality, had to do with shading of sites, and things that are well outside of just kind of technical state building code matters. There was some discussion about that at the committee level, from other committee members who are on the administration and enforcement side of the building code, who had similar concerns. And so again, when that revised appendix was brought back for discussion purposes based on the way the initial committee meeting went, we highlighted some of those things in that discussion. Hopefully that answers your question.
Any more discussion or comment from the board, from members?
This is Eli Bolam. I guess I just like a question, or Secretary again, I just like to reiterate the question to Building Codes Division staff about whether the costs have been reviewed through the cost analysis tool identified in Executive Order 1720, Section 6, to determine what these costs are, so that we can, as a board, make the determination if they are, in fact, justify implementing now, or if we should look at using the cost to bump this to the next code cycle in April.
Through the chair, this is Alana Cox with the division. As I think you all know, determining cost for code items is really challenging because it's variable so much on exactly the design and specifics of the home involved. And so it's challenging to put an exact number on it. I think ultimately, anything that goes through this board that's a code item, you guys have to make the finding that the added cost is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources, which probably is the category we're talking about here. So that's really ultimately the test is, in order to move something forward, you need to be able to say that the added cost is necessary to conserve scarce resources. You know, what that cost is going to be is going to depend a little bit, and we really rely on your expertise to help inform us. You know, we have to put together cost findings for the rulemaking as well, and a fiscal impact statement, and a housing cost impact statement, and we really rely on the expertise of builders because you're in a much better position to inform us on what the exact dollars and cents will be, with the understanding that it's always going to depend. You know, for some houses, you know, for home builders who are building above code homes, maybe there's no cost impact for this. But for some builders and for some types of homes, there's going to be a cost impact for this, and the number's going to depend a little bit. And so I know we have some builders on the phone, and we'd really be interested in hearing kind of specifics from you. Maybe it's helpful to kind of go through the three items that Tony talked about, you know, the panel space and the raceway, and then that kind of intangible cost he was speaking about with regards to the, you know, plans designating the roof location. But ultimately, it's about making that finding. And if you can't make the finding, you can't put the code forward and make that motion and vote for a motion that includes a cost that is not necessary to conserve scarce resources. So that's kind of the line in the sand. Is that helpful?
Thanks, Alana. Yes, thank you. And so that's Eli. And just one follow-up question through the chair. Can Building Code Division staff explain how executive order might supersede code or take precedence of requiring solar ready? Does the Section 6 analysis of cost take precedence over the findings that we have to follow under the Oregon Advised statute?
I think our role, we have three options here. Either we approve the proposal as it is, or we approve it with amendment, or we disapprove the proposal. And that's our role, and we make this recommendation to the Building Codes Division, and go from there. So I don't think we have to think about if the executive order will supersede the code or not. We have a proposal document, and we have to make this one of these three decisions. And I think building staff, we don't have to approve what we have here. It's not an obligation for us. We have to make, we have to make a decision based on the three options, not only the first one.
This is John Miller. Through the chair, I guess I'd like to ask a practical question of the new director. So if this were to be disapproved under the logic that we we can't make the decision, we can't make the finding about the cost effectiveness. Does that mean that it doesn't get into the code in this cycle, or does that still leave the option for the governor calling the code division and saying, this is how it's going to be, and that's going to be in the code?
Through the chair, this is Alana. So what's before us today is an interim amendment because we've delayed the code to April 1st. So this is just for what should go into place October 1st, which I think Emily noticed. That's why we're having this extra meeting, so there's an opportunity to meet that deadline. The next meeting, whatever you do today or put forward, that would be part of what's voted on at the October 7th meeting for the April code that would be printed as the integrated code going forward. You know, the executive order acknowledges that it's not waiving any statutory board processes. There's an understanding built into that EO that all of the existing processes of the board are still in place. And that cost finding is a statutory finding. You know, the deadline is the deadline. They've asked us to consider it and do it. And but as I think Eli also acknowledged, what exactly solar ready means, we're really looking to you guys for as well. There are several options. It was a robust discussion at Code Committee that was over the course of 2 meetings. Because it's important that builders understand how to build it, obviously, and also that our enforcement colleagues know how to enforce it. And that was a lot of the conversation around some of those issues in the appendix was around the enforcement side as well.
I just have a suggestion. If this document go back to the staff and see how we can provide introduce the exceptions that there are in the Appendix T, the shaded roof, the orientation of the roof, because it doesn't make sense if you don't, if you don't get the benefit of solar, why you have to spend the money up front. And also we have some idea about the cost of the scope of work for the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, was that a question for our staff?
No, I just have a suggestion to the member of the board.
Thank you.
If we have a cost of the work, and also it seems like the industry are worrying that about the exceptions that there are in the code, and they are not taken into consideration. And if we spend the money, you have to spend it in a way that you can benefit in the future. And then we have a cost, relative cost of the work. Any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Rick, right? If I could. So I guess I'm going to say this in a different way. So today I developed a subdivision, and along one side of my subdivision are tall fir trees. So under this proposal, we would not be required to do anything on those houses that back up to the fir trees because they'd be shaded. However, in the future, there's a second phase comes in. All those trees are now gone, or a portion of those trees are gone, and there's homes there. Now those houses have to go back and completely retrofit. As where if we go with the N1107.4, every house gets the raceway, and that is the main cost that's incurred by the homeowner when they go to do solar, is putting in the raceway. Because, you know, drilling through a stud and putting some wire through to the panel, making space on the roof, those things can all be taken care of at the time of installation. So that would be the one thing that I would just put out there. I see that Jeni has a statement, so I'll defer.
Go ahead, Jeni.
My apologies. I'm not really sure how to engage in the process. Rich, I guess it depends on, in your example with the development, it depends on which version we're looking at, as you said. NBC's proposal, that row of houses along that side that's shaded would be required to be built solar ready, even though there are shade obstructions that would make solar financially infeasible because it would not qualify for incentives and probably would not produce as much as the homeowner would like. The exception that our suggested change tries to preserve that exception and tries to work through some language to allow you to make that case to the code official that those houses along that side should not necessarily have to meet solar ready requirements, whereas other houses in development will still be required to be built solar ready. The challenge, and I think the discussion earlier was around the dangers of creating a situation in which solar would be ultimately precluded. Really, the shading and the roof area is the way in which solar is most often precluded. As you know very well, solar installers are experts at trying to fit solar onto existing buildings, despite many challenges. But there are homes that are not able to have solar installed on them, and it's always the hardest when it's brand new homes where the home buyer purchases it and then is very excited to install solar, but they can't because there are structural reasons that make it impossible. Obstructions in the roof area, shading, just the design of the roof itself.
If I could, through the chair. So if I'm understanding that correctly, then in every jurisdiction, a different person is going to make the determination as to whether it has to be solar or not. Is that what I'm hearing?
I guess with the suggested changes that I included here, pulling those out of the IRC original appendix, the code official is ultimately the arbiter of code just generally and makes those decisions. There are whether or not the exceptions apply, and the exceptions are based on roof area size and orientation, external shading, and what we suggested here was a couple of different pathways to kind of understand that shading. Not probably dissimilar from how there are passive solar, or there are code sections that refer to passive solar features, and those passive solar features allow certain pathways or other pathways, and so that's a conversation that the builders already could be having with code officials.
Thank you. Is it Doug?
Yes, Levi, due to the chair. So I agree with the points that John Cameller made regarding the cost issue, and of course, this would apply to every home being built. But my concern is along the lines of design restraints, because the designers look at projects a little bit different. I do have a product that is currently being used by the solar industry, and it is an item that attaches a shade cover to a house. So the current technologies change. They change all the time. And I think we might be pigeonholing ourselves into a product category or a method of construction that isn't going to adapt to changing technology, be that roofing shingles that also serve as solar. There's coatings. There's a lot of technology coming out that it's changing rapidly. And I keep up with the solar industry through trade publications and the installers and manufacturers. So I just see this as a very restrictive proposal in where the industry is going. I think it's intended well, but I think it's too broad of a brush. And then it's going to, and as a remodel, we're always touching houses, of course, that have been built, but now we're adapting them to the latest products and features and that sort of thing. So it's not a challenge to remodel and add things. But I think if you're a new home builder, you may be adding products and code in this specific case. It's going to add considerable cost that will never ever be used. And I don't think that's wise. So that's my point I have to make.
Any further discussion?
Eli, question through the chair. I think I heard at the committee discussion, so I know there's a couple committee members here, maybe they can chime in, or Revy, maybe as a building official you can chime in, or building code staff. But as far as regulating shading on a roof from adjacent objects, is that outside the building code? I recall I heard in the committee that may be under planning. Is that correct?
Through the chair, again, Tony Rocco with the division. Thank you, Mr. Boland. Yes, it is. When we start talking about things that are outside the site or that have to do with required orientation of a building or trees or things like that, that is it's absolutely outside the scope and application of the state building code.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I guess this is Eli again. Just my last thought through the chair. That's unfortunate. I don't think we should require any cost to be put into any kind of solar ready for a structure that would just never get it because of obstructions from neighboring lots. But that's a challenge we have to figure out how to work with in a bigger picture. I guess I'll just come back to reminding folks that what we're looking at is kind of a simplified version IRC appendix that has been vetted by a committee that we nominated of subject matter experts that have made a recommendation. And it does fall pretty middle of the road between the home builders and the best practice solar practices. So again, I feel comfortable with the specs. As far as those guidelines go, I still struggle with the cost statement of saying that we have to do it for health and safety, environmental purposes and whatnot. But as far as following the guidelines from the executive order and the intent of how I interpret it, I think we're pretty darn close.
Good again, Rich Fry. Could the staff or maybe somebody that was on the committee, I heard there was a non-unanimous vote, but I think it was a much closer vote than just non-unanimous. And so does anybody have that information as to what the actual vote was on the committee?
Mike is in the committee, so Mike and...
Yeah, Mr. Chair, actually, I don't remember the tally. I'm sorry, Mr. Fry.
Thank you.
For the chair, I believe it was 6-2 with one abstain. That's what I read. I would for validation from building code staff.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is John Camiller. Isn't the issue, though, that in making a recommendation to adopt Appendix U, we can't make the finding, the cost effectiveness finding. However, it seems to me that we could, and that has to do primarily with the restrictions on obstructions on the roofs. You know, because the reality is you have plumbing, you have all kinds of vents that go through. There are all kinds of things that happen on the roof. So there's that issue. The second issue is the panel. And I don't think we really understand or have any kind of consensus on what the cost impacts would be. If you're building a 4,000 square foot house, probably no cost impact. If you're trying to build affordable housing, 1,200 square feet, might well have an impact. And so we just can't meet the standard of saying that that whatever the impacts are, it's worth it. However, I think we could say that with the N1107.4, the cost impacts are pretty de minimis. I mean, they just are. And what you're doing with that section is not precluding something happening in the future. So it's a very small cost to not preclude, to eliminate a potential large cost to get from panel area into the attic, okay? So I think you could say adopting N1107.4, however we would do this as Appendix U, I think you could say that the cost is necessary, whatever the specifics of that language is. I can't remember. The director, the end part of that specific language seems to fit with the N1107.4. So when we get to the recommendation, or to the recommendations, I think that's what we ought to do, adopt 1107.4 and then try and develop better cost information so we can make an informed decision. Thank you.
Any more discussion?
Oh, through the chair, was that an actual motion then to adopt N1107.4?
No, I'm not there yet. Any more discussion? I think we have, like now we have three options here. And we have to have a motion, either approve the proposal or amend the proposal or reject the proposal.
This is Eli Bowman.
Mr. Chair, this is John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as the Appendix U in the packet, if we're going to be making decisions about that today, I have questions that were brought up in the public testimony about, for the Building Codes Division. One was the exception to use the 10-gauge copper wire. The way it's written says that 8 feet additional wire beyond the termination is required, and the testimony suggested it might only be 6 inches, and that seems like a pretty big discrepancy. I wonder if that's if Building Code staff can clarify the logic behind the 8-foot requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, Tony Rocco with the division. So that exception, it's basically the exception to section U 103.3, and that was a committee recommended language for that. So it came from a committee member during that process. Thank you.
Sorry, through the chair, Tony, did you say that the exception under U 103.3 was recommended by a committee member?
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, through the chair, can someone confirm, is N1107.4 essentially roughly the same provision as U103.3.
The chair again, Tony Rocco with the division. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, any motion?
Through the chair, this is Emily again. I again, like Eli, I appreciate all the work that has gone into this. I wish I was at a point where I could say that I would make a motion to amend and approve Appendix U. However, I'm concerned that a lot of comments have been raised about, you know, just the brief language that's in there, and some of the comments that have been raised actually say that just how concise the language is doesn't necessarily do us any favors. I'm concerned that if we try to make a motion to amend and approve, we here today together are not going to be able to make all of the amendments that need to be made in order to make this a sufficient piece of code. Not to mention, I still don't have any confidence that we understand what the cost impacts are.
Okay. Any other comments?
Chair, this is Gordon Anslow. Can I add something? I've listened to all these comments, and I think we've had kind of a robust kicking around of the pros and cons of all this. I am a builder, been doing this for a long, long time. We certainly struggle with trying to deliver some kind of affordable housing, which is continually harder to do. And without kind of restating a bunch of stuff that I've ranted on about in the past, I have this perspective of people trying to build really small entry-level house versus people that have a lot more resources. They're building larger houses, spending lots of money building bigger houses and so forth. And we really have little recognition of the sort of environmental benefit of building. People deciding to build and live in very small economical houses. You know, they do it frequently for reasons of their own economic limitations, but it certainly also has a meaningful environmental impact. And then we have people that, you know, and God knows we've built plenty of ridiculous big houses that are far more than maybe any reasonable person needs, but to have kind of similar standards imposed on the people that are literally trying to just get into something, whether it's a tiny house or whatever, or the same as somebody that's building a 4,000-foot house, you know, seems a little ham-handed to me. I've been involved in and followed solar industry for a long, 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 long time. I know that technology is ever changing, and the efficacy of panels changes, and the amount of area that's needed changes. And I have a little concern about, you know, I'm kind of reminded of watching an old movie with people, you know, using mini floppy disks and stuff. Stuff is changing all the time, and the efficacy of panels changes. Another concern, which as someone that has been heavily involved in design now for literally over 50 years, I worry about the requirement for providing area on the roof, and as someone that is deeply involved in a lot of design, and on small lots with small houses, which, by the way, frequently, in order to be considerate of other houses, doing lots of hip roofs so that you're not having houses shading other houses or looming over them, that I could see having something in the code that says what you need to have in the way of roof area, the definition of it, and even setting aside all the stuff that normal order of things sticks through the roof in the way of vents of assorted types and all that, is that let's just say that you build and sell a house to somebody, and they come back and they analyze, even if they're not going to install a solar array, whether or not you actually met the letter of the law on the design of their roof. And if not, then are you legally on the hook? Come back and revise their house. This, I know that no one's talked about this, but trust me, I have been around the horn a few times, and I see this kind of thing go. And everything that gets introduced into the code, that this is a requirement, you must do this, particularly when it's something that could be fuzzy. It's one thing if you have a requirement that says that you need to put a conduit from your panel up into the attic, let us say. That's fairly, binary. Yes, no. I worry about stuff that introduces things which are subject to a lot of interpretation and might introduce confusion or opportunity for, shall we say, creative lawsuits, a new little industry to go after builders and say, you know what, this guy didn't actually meet the letter of the law on this. Anyway, those are my comments, and I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is John Camiller.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion, and that motion would be that we amend the proposed Appendix U by its complete deletion and inclusion of, in its place, the language in N1107.4 as proposed in the July meeting by the division. And perhaps that should be read so everybody understands that. Anyway, that's my proposal. That's my motion.
Second, is there any second to this motion?
I would second that motion. Rich Fry.
Agreed, Rich Tovar.
Any discussion?
Eli, can you please repeat it? Sorry.
Yes, this is John Camiller through the chair. My motion is to amend the existing proposal by completely deleting the proposed Appendix U and instead approving the original division proposal made in the July meeting and identified as N1107.4 solar ready as it was modified there, and I will read it. So N1107.4 solar ready, a square metal junction box not less than 4 inches by 4 inches, 102 millimeter by 102 millimeters, with a metal box cover shall be provided within 24 inches, 610 millimeters, horizontally or vertically of the main electrical panel. A minimum 3/4 inch raceway shall extend from the junction box to a capped roof termination or to an accessible location in the attic with a vertical clearance of not less than 36 inches, parentheses, 914 millimeters. Where the raceway terminates in the attic, the termination shall be located not less than 6 inches, 152 millimeters above the installation. The end of the raceway shall be marked as reserved for solar. That's the end of the proposed amendment, proposed motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, this is Andy Bolton with BCD. I just want to jump in here and make sure that our motion has a finding that the added cost, if necessary, is, added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of occupants of or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
John Camiller, through the chair, I would include that language. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that.
Thank you.
John, what's the difference with what we have in this proposal and what you are proposing?
Through the chair, in response to the chair, I deleted the entirety of Appendix U, rather replaced it with this more abbreviated N1104.7, and I'm not sure whether it would, I think it modifies the existing solar-ready language in the code and completely deletes Appendix U, which has significantly more language, which language has raised issues of cost and perhaps added costs that might not be useful given new technology, and also added costs that might actually create significant additional added costs because of structural and other building necessities. So it eliminates all of Appendix U and replaces it by this abbreviated language, which is partially in Appendix U, I'll admit that, but it just has that one section. It just modifies N1107.4.
No, I asked this question because you are providing the same, the appendix is asking you to do the same thing, but, and it's for every building house you build, so the cost, you are, you know, all the houses will have this. Instead of have the exception of, you know, not, you know, some houses because of the shade, because of the orientation of the roof, because of the small size of the house, you don't have to provide this kind of cost.
I admit that, but it doesn't create any requirement for reserving of space on the roof. It doesn't establish a requirement for identifying that space on the drawing. It doesn't require paneled space and the attendant costs that might be there. It simply creates a pathway from near the panel to the roof space, whether it's on the roof or in the attic. So it's just a portion of what's in use.
But it doesn't really, you know, if somebody buys a house with this kind of items and thinking that they're going to have a solar panels in the future, but, you know, the shape of the roof, you know, the orientation, it's not there, then it creates, I think it creates a false, you know, understanding what people are buying.
Actually, perhaps that's the case. You know, if somebody is buying a house for the purpose of putting a solar panel on it, one would think that they do some research and understand the difficulties, because you can't just put a solar panel on the roof. There's a lot of other attendant costs that go with it. My proposal just creates a pathway so there doesn't have to be significant structural changes to the house in order to accommodate that future solar. It doesn't remove all of the challenges, but neither would you remove all of the challenges. My proposal seems to me to be the least cost, biggest impact. You're still going to have lots of costs putting solar panels on the roof and connecting it into your power system. At least you don't have a structure cost to get to the roof. Everything else is precluding many of the other sections of Appendix U either preclude you from doing something or require you to do something or create a future reduction of cost when you put the panel on. I don't know how further to explain it. I'm eliminating the things that I think are maybe not even necessary in the future, or today create a cost that might never be needed by simply putting in a pathway to get to the location. That's my proposal.
So through the chair, this is our discussion period, right?
Yes.
Okay, so John, I appreciate you putting forth a proposal or motion for us to discuss. Unfortunately, I don't think, I think that could potentially be a way forward, but I don't think it necessarily takes into account the recommendations of the code subcommittee, which they spent a lot of time examining this issue. I also still don't, I haven't heard cost findings that I feel comfortable agreeing to, so I don't know that substitution, bulk substitution, like eliminating Appendix U and substituting it for N107.4 would be sufficient in my humble opinion. I don't know if this is even allowed, but I might actually make another motion to disapprove the proposed code provisions with the reason that we would like more time to edit and revise Appendix U to, and also collect more data on the added costs, and with the idea that it could be taken up by the April 1st deadline. I don't know if that's even allowed, what I just said.
I don't know. My concern is, if we say that we don't have a cost, and these proposals have the same cost as what, at least the primary get ready for solar has the same cost as what you have proposed in this appendix. So, but you don't provide adequate space for panels. You don't provide. You don't make sure that the road orientation can have these panels. It can have the solar energy and all that thing. So we have a motion right now, and it was second, correct?
That's correct.
BCD staff, can we go to the vote, or this is like a.
Yes, are you ready for the roll call, Chair? Mr. Chair?
I still have a little bit more discussion if I could.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is Rich Fry again through the chair. I think that the proposal that's on the table, the motion that's on the table, is good because it's going to be in every home. So whether it's shaded now, not shaded in the future, that all the homes from the enactment of this forward will have that raceway, which is the main cost prohibitive portion of adding solar panels, in my opinion. I do agree that not knowing the cost of all the rest of that is an issue for us, and that I guess my question would be, if we decided to not approve the N1107.4 and said that we couldn't approve what's been recommended at this time, where does that take us? It takes us to the April implementation, but what would then come back to us in April? The exact same thing that we're looking at today? Or would there be modifications? Would we just be getting the cost? Can someone explain that to me?
Through the chair, I echo Rich's question.
I think if you go to 20, I think if we disapprove this, it has to go back to BCD and maybe back to the full committee to introduce the concern that comes from this oral presentation, and see if we can have a document that can be approved by the committee. Right, Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. So the understanding was that the board's action or recommendation today would be included in the next meeting packet, which is actually October 7th. So not too far out here from this additional board meeting. So whatever, let's say, for example, the motion that's on the floor currently, and regarding that language from N1107.4, which is also U103, I believe, 103.3 of the appendix. If that's what is approved or recommended by this board going forward, then that is what will appear in that October 7th packet for this same topic. Hopefully that answers the questions. Thank you.
Through the chair. So Tony, if we don't adopt the motion and we just don't approve anything, what would then come back at the next meeting?
This is Alana. I think, we can bring you something else to your next meeting. That's kind of a deadline for us to get items approved to be integrated into the April 1st code. And so we would request some pretty specific direction from the board on what you'd like to see in that next proposal, or if you'd like more process, we could pull this out of the integrated code and continue to have the discussion and kind of start over. We've got options on the table, but we're going to be coming up against our printing and rulemaking deadline for April at the end of October. So that board meeting is the one where we'll be asking you what you want to see in the integrated printed April 1st code. We'll need that decision by the end of October. And we'll take our cues from you in terms of what you want to see and discuss at that meeting.
Through the chair, I think Alana or Tony or somebody from staff is best equipped to answer this question. Would we be able to ask, this is a little bit unorthodox, but would we be able to ask that all stakeholders provide comments or recommended revisions on the same document? So leveraging the proposal that's on the table and asking, not using the exact same document, obviously, but basically asking everyone to provide comments to strike certain sections or so on, so that if we did come back at October 7th, we would all be able to look at those recommendations side by side on the same document.
Tony?
Through the chair, again for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. I'm not sure I understand the question fully, Emily, but it sounded like you were looking at, so if this board took action and then recommending that something beyond that be included in the October 7th packet, did I understand that correctly?
Right. My suggestion is essentially we're looking at this proposal, and our job is to either approve the proposal, approve amendments to the proposal, or disapprove the proposal. My concerns are that a lot of other issues or potential edits have been brought to our attention, and I haven't had the time or the wherewithal to overlay those issues onto the proposal to understand how it would affect the actual code language. And I was just wondering if there was a way that we could ask stakeholders, even potential board members, to go back to this single page document add their comments directly onto the proposal, and then have that as part of our board packet ahead of the October 7th meeting so that we could have all of those side by side.
Through the chair, this is John Camiller. I guess, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And the issue, if I can interpret your basic concern, is you still can't come to the cost finding because we don't know the information. And so there's two questions. The first is, what cost information do we think we can develop by then? Because in the past when we've had cost information, it's been developed by outside agencies, reviewed by the division, and kind of presented as this is our consensus. I question whether we can get there by October 7th, and I think that's realistic. And the second concern I would have is that on October 7th, from what I just heard the director say, is we pretty much have to make a decision. There is no punting the ball down the field on October 7th. And so they pretty much have to provide us with something that can be voted on for sure on October 7th, and which I thought was the purpose of this meeting today, was to give them something that they could incorporate in the larger document that can then be voted on and approved to go to printing. And maybe this process is not without some confusion in my mind. And maybe I'm missing the point on that, but my recommendation or my motion was a way to get us to that point so they can have a code that perhaps might not go all the way that everybody wants it to go, but doesn't preclude anything, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Through the chair,
Through the
this
chair,
is Alana. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Just to kind of clarify, so we all know kind of what you guys are voting on today, the question before you right now is on an interim amendment to the 2017 code that would go into place October 1st. Our intention was to avoid confusion and have some consistency that whatever goes into place October 1st would be the same as what goes into place April 1st. And that's what you would be voting on at your next meeting. That doesn't have to be the case. They don't have to be the same, and there are options there. But today the question is, to meet the governor's deadline in the executive order, October 1st, for an interim amendment. And then at your meeting next month, the question will be what should be in the integrated April 1st code.
Through the chair, Rich Fry. So, Emily and Eli, you both had questions about cost, and if we were to adopt the N1107.4, which is U 103.3, I think that we have a pretty good understanding of that cost, because it's a finite thing. It's so much a foot, or it's whatever the case may be. Would that address your issues, or would you still have issues if we were to go forward with the proposal?
Through the chair, Rich, thank you for asking. I think what I just heard from Alana changes things a little bit, because I think what I just heard was that irrespective of what we decide today, we're going to do this again on October 7th. For implementation in the April 1st code. Is that correct, Alana?
Yes, that's correct. So it can be the same. If you approve something today, we can bring that to you at your meeting next month. It can be different. All of those options are on the table.
Okay. All right. Rich, I think in answer to your question that relieves my concerns a bit, knowing that we have a second chance to enact something a little bit more thoughtfully for the April 1st code.
Through the chair, this is Eli. So my understanding is if we approve the amended view that is based on the N 1107.4, that would go into effect from October 1st until April 1st. And then if we decided to revisit and make any changes in the October meeting, then that would change it in April 1st. So builders, that could be really confusing for builders. I don't like that approach. And I also don't think that, to go back and revisit it, because we have so much other stuff to look at in the October meeting. Based on everything I've heard today, I'm not convinced that a raceway makes it solar ready. And I'm not convinced that that's good money spent that's going to set somebody up for success. So just the same, if I'm more inclined to go with the recommendation from the majority opinion of the committee that's based on the IRC and is a simplified version of what we're getting from the solar industry, but I still have the hang up on the cost. That's why I can't support the appendix view that was originally presented in the board packet. So I guess what I would like to see is a summary in writing. We've been batting around, just throwing out some costs, but it sounds like we got kind of the raceway figured out, but what's the real cost of the panel? And to the points you brought up earlier, Rich, what is the cost, of opportunity cost of not being able to run a fireplace chimney up through a roof, or really have to look around, particularly on the smaller homes. So I think I could support the appendix as was presented to the board today if I can see that there's costs that I feel are justified in the cost finding statement. But as the most standing, I can't support it because I'm not convinced that it's going to actually make a house solar ready for all the reasons that were outlined in the Oregon Home Builders letter. I mean, frankly, I was surprised that that recommendation was to go with the appendix because there's costs there that I don't think translate directly into benefits.
I have a question for Rich. I mean, what's the difference if we adopt the proposal for this for a period of from October to April, and we include the recommendation from the industry and from the home builders about the exceptions and we clean up the language that it seems like it's confusing to the builders.
Through the chair, I believe that was addressed to me. I just feel that the design, the roof structures, I mean, we have so many houses that have smaller second stories. I mean, there are so many issues involved in the roof spacing that it concerns me to have that as a requirement. And like I was saying, I agree that having a code from October to April and then changing it would be very disruptive, and you would have building officials trying to make decisions based on one if they didn't like the new. I mean, it just seems very convoluted, and we already go through enough trying to develop and build homes and make them affordable. So that would be my recommendation. If anything, I would make a motion to modify the motion to just deny what's out there and come back at our April meeting or at our October meeting and do that.
Any more discussion? I think.
Yeah, this is John Cameller through the chair. I wanted to clarify something. I don't know if I heard this correctly, but the home builder's testimony recommended disapproving you, not approving it. It disapproves it. And so that was the recommendation. And I thought I heard one of the discussions that the home builders had recommended approving it. And Mike, maybe you can talk about that.
Through the chair, Mr. Camiller, yes, that's correct. The Home Builders Association recommends disapproval of Appendix U in favor of approval of the division's original proposal and 1107.4, I believe it is. And primarily, well, there were a number of reasons in our testimony, but one thing we've continued to talk about is cost. I think the division had some reasonable cost assumptions as far as the electrical raceway and the panel size go. Although I think there's some room for discussion in the cost of the panel location, as Mr. Fry pointed out, depending on the size of the home, and that may apply to the raceway as well. But the raceway, I think you could bid. The nebulous part of it, the unknown, comes in with the design of the roof. It's something that's been difficult to discuss all the way through this process because it's not typically addressed in code. It doesn't fit, and that's why this has been such a challenge. And I would just throw out just a typical example. As a home builder, I use stock plans for my homes, and when I run a stock plan through the city of Corvallis, the second time I do it, I don't have to pay for an entire new plan review. I just get a plan check or repeat plan review. The timeline is significantly shorter, and the cost is significantly less. And so I would put the design of the roof space similar to a good example is windows. In Corvallis, if I put the same plan on a corner, I have to add more windows to the side of it. And that requires a revision of the plan in order to do that. And it can sometimes kick me out of that process besides having the drafting that goes into that situation. And most recently, I had a plan kicked back to me because the window drawings did not go through each page of the plan, and so the city felt that having them only on the elevation was insufficient. So it requires significant drafting in order to get the information to the person who would be involved in doing that work. If we apply that to the roof, it's difficult to get that to the plumber, to the HVAC technician, to the others that are involved in that. So that's part of the unknown with the expense to the roof, and I apologize for taking so much of your time with that.
Through the chair, this is John Camiller. Just to add to that, what Mr. Goodrich just said, let's just say you have the house on this side of the street and you've identified the roof. When you put it on the opposite side of the street, the roof is in the opposite direction, and so now you have to redesign everything for that same exact house on the opposite side of the same exact street. Now, hopefully you don't build the same house right across from each other, Mike, but you get my point. There are issues here that we just don't understand at this point, and I question, frankly, whether we're going to understand them on October 7th. And so my recommendation is that we use the N1107.4 as a way to create the possibility without creating costs that makes it really easy. We're just eliminating the obstruction that precludes it from happening, or maybe increases the cost of it happening to the extent that it wouldn't happen at all. That's my point. I can't articulate it any better than that. Thank you.
Through the chair,
Chair Gordon Ansel here.
Well, the quick question is, and this would be to a solar contractor, how much does it take off their bid if there's an existing raceway? How much is it saving the homeowner?
Angela, I want to give you an opportunity to talk to that. You're a little closer to the contractor. I can start. Before I came to work for Energy Trust, I was a contractor. It depends on the site. The contractors, as I mentioned before, solar ready is a relatively new concept, and so they don't have the luxury of having solar ready homes to install on. The ability to run wire through pre-existing conduit decreases the installation time and provides the home owner with a much cleaner installation. Depending on the site, that can be significant or small in cost. As you can imagine, 3-story tall, skinny houses, infill projects versus homes with shorter elevation, just a little bit different. I guess I would say that when we're talking about raceway, it's really important to be clear about what that means, because EMT conduit is much easier to pull wire through than flex, and if flex is allowed to create that raceway, it may not be usable because just by definition, the conduit is required to have a minimum number of bends, and you don't really like bending conduit, so you just end up trying to make it as easy of a run as possible. BCD's proposal for metal-clad cable was a great middle of the road, and in the suggested changes, I identified some things that would make it more possible for the solar industry because the size and quantity of the cables doesn't meet the current circuit needs.
Thank you. Through the chair, I guess I just have a couple of things I just heard that if we modify the amendment, I think I could probably get behind it as the one that's on the table. And that would be to follow just the interconnection pathway, but to follow the language such that it truly will make a difference and save the homeowners money. So that would be including the exception to allow the copper cable. And I think we should consider the language around the rigid as well. So if the whole point is to save time for a solar contractor to do the install and save the homeowner money, we don't want them fighting the challenges of flexible conduit. So I would throw out there as a board looking at just the interconnection pathway, let's optimize it as much as we can to save costs on the future installation and provide the exception to have an alternative method of the cable.
Chair Gordon Hansel here. A couple of quick comments. A lot of houses that we build for folks these days have gas fireplaces and gas water heaters that have type B vents. B vents are limited in the amount of lateral run that they can do as a function of their total height. You can't just run them an endless lateral distance. So I effectively see, as someone that is heavily involved in design, that the adoption of the provisions that include the business about the area on the roof could quite literally drive, for instance, where you can put, depending on orientation and all of that. Take your plan and you have to explain to the owners that, I'm sorry, the only place that we can provide the required roof area happens to be in the same area that if you want this fireplace in your great room, that we have to vent it in there. So sorry, but you can't have that, which sounds dramatic, but I mean, that is the way these things work. The other thing is we are certainly seeing a lot more interest in modern designs, which frequently have rather low pitches in many cases, and particularly with small and tiny homes. You don't have attic space. You have finishes applied to the underside of rafters, essentially. That's very common in tiny homes. So, and I hate to get into the minutia on this, but saying that you just terminate, that you're going to terminate in the attic, well, you may not have an attic. And I worry about adopting something quickly that hasn't considered all these, admittedly tedious sounding, but really quite real considerations about, well, what happens when the way the code was written, which has maybe, we have all in our mind, okay, here's an attic that's like 8 feet high in the middle, and having that 3 feet clear is not going to be a problem if we have an attic in the first place. There are a lot of things. The devil is, as always, in the details, and I think there are lots of details. These are just a couple that come to my mind just, on kind of first hearing. I largely support what John says in that it keeps it simple enough that you're not, opening Pandora's box. But Pandora's box has many things in there that we may not even have thought of yet. So be careful about what we adopt. Thank you.
Through the chair, this is John. M1107.4, it says it's in a capped roof termination or to an accessible location in the attic with a vertical clearance of not less than 36 inches. So I think Gordon, in the situation where you've got a vaulted ceiling and you really don't have an attic, then it would, if there isn't an attic, then it would have to go through the roof. I think that issue is already solved.
Okay.
So Eli's concerned about using conduit instead of a metal raceway. I think that was the essence of what he was saying. I would certainly agree to that. And I'm not sure how we would say that, but I agree with the essence of what you're saying, Eli, there.
I think we have to, any more discussion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second, and I think we have to go to the vote if there is no more discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Eli, oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I believe that Eli was trying to make a modification to the motion, which was to only allow hard conduit for the raceway and not to allow flex. So Eli, if you would go ahead and make that amendment, I think that would be better.
Thank you, Rich. That's what I was attempting to get at. So looking at the verbiage I'll throw out what was recommended in the public comments. It's phrased as 3/4 inch aluminum EMT flash conduit. I'm not sure if that's the best way to frame it or if we want to just say rigid. And I also would like to add that we modify the proposed motion to include the exception to use the copper cable. I'm not sure the best way if I have to repeat the whole thing, or if we can just add in, I guess first is the 3/4 inch aluminum EMT flash conduit, the appropriate verbiage, or do we just say rigid conduit? I'm for discussion, I guess, before attempting to put the language in the motion.
Through the chair.
Eli. Sorry, real quick, Eli, would you be interested in typing out what exactly terminology you're trying to replicate in the chat box for everybody to look at?
Yes, I can do that. I'm going to attempt to do that. Let's see here.
While you're working on that, through the chair, this is Alana. We have our electrical chief here because you guys have an agenda item still left on your agenda later on low-rise electrical. So he may be able to provide some insight since we're kind of getting into that electrical world here. This is Keith.
Keith Anderson, Electrical Program Chief. So whatever the conduit, it needs to be a metal raceway, and that leaves it wide open to whether you use EMT or flex, or it puts it back to the electrical code. So if you specify metal raceway, then that would allow anything that the NEC would allow. The reason it has to be metal is because of the DC conductors. It's required to be in a metal raceway. And researching this out, the new technology with the microinverters, it's basically a branch circuit that's run up there. The older technology, which is about 60% of what's installed today, still requires the DC, which requires the metal raceway. So if you reword it, that would help a lot as far as what would be expected to be put in and what would meet code and be the most useful.
I have a question to Tony. The motion on the floor, it is appropriate because we are not amending the proposal. We are basically disapproving the proposal. And we are here proposing, the motion on the floor is proposing to use another code section. Or is it okay the way the motion on the floor, or we have to deny this proposal and we go to another motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as far as the motion on the floor and then the proposed modification to the motion, the original proposer of the original motion would have to accept Mr. Bolam's proposed modification. But as far as, if I understand your question correctly, that the motion is keeping essentially U103.3 of the current appendix. That's the same exact language of N1107.4 that was presented to this board on July 8th. Thank you.
This is Eli through the chair. So that might be the solution, is that we can modify the motion to only adopt 3.3, and we can modify, Jeni Hall typed into the comment, the metal raceway, we could specify that as non-flexible metal raceway. And then the only other thing I would throw out there is in the exception that we consider the 6-inch recommendation instead of the 8 feet, because this is coming from the industry experts, and that's going to save costs, and 8 feet seems excessive.
Through the chair, I agree with that substitution.
Okay, I believe that was John's motion, and I take it that this is a friendly amendment to the motion, so John would have to accept that, is my understanding.
This is Eli, that is correct. I'm proposing that as a friendly amendment to the motion.
I am typing quickly right now, and I would email that all to you in just a moment, the way I understand it. This is John.
John, instead of email, if you could read it off to us, that would be better for public meetings purposes, so that we're transparent for everybody here.
Okay, just 1 second. All right. So the amendment I would just add to the N1107.4 the following as part of the point 4. The metal raceway material shall not include flexed conduit. And there is, as an exception, in lieu of the 3/4-inch metal raceway, a minimum number 10 copper 3-wire MC cable installed from the junction box to a termination point, including 6 inches additional wire, is permitted.
Any more discussion? I think we'll go ahead to the vote. Do the roll call for the vote?
Yes, Mr. Chair, ready for roll call?
Yes. Yes, please.
Eli Bolam,
Yeah. Wait, I'm sorry, stop, wait. What is the motion now? It got revised, and I don't know what the motion is anymore.
Go ahead, John, repeat your motion with the amendment, please.
My motion is this: to delete Appendix U and replace it with the July proposal from the division N1107.4 as modified in that proposal and further modified in the discussion, and I will read it. A square metal junction box not less than 4 inches by 4 inches, 102 millimeters by 102 millimeters with a metal box. You know what? I would like to get rid of the millimeter stuff and just use feet and inches. So a square metal junction box not less than 4 inches by 4 inches with a metal box cover shall be provided within 24 inches horizontally or vertically of the main electrical panel. A minimum 3/4 inch metal raceway shall extend from the junction box to a capped roof termination or to an accessible location in the attic with a vertical clearance of not less than 36 inches. Where the raceway terminates in the attic, the termination shall be located not less than 6 inches above the insulation. The end of the raceway shall be marked as reserved for solar. The metal raceway material shall not include flex conduit. Exception, in lieu of the 3/4 inch metal raceway, a minimum number 10 copper 3-wire MC cable installed from the junction box to the termination point, including 6 inches additional wire, is permitted. At the end of the motion.
Okay, Lee, you got it?
With the finding, golly, the finding that, at the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public or necessary to conserve scarce resource.
Okay. Go ahead and call the board, please.
Eli Volum,
Yes, I approve.
Rich Tover,
I approve.
Douglas Lethine, Doug Lethine, Emily Kemper, Emily Kemper,
I approve.
Rich Fry,
I approve.
John Camiller,
I approve.
James Austin, Gordon Anslow,
Approve.
Chair Robbie Tamerholet,
I disapprove.
I'm going to call Douglas Lethine again. Motion passes 6-1.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, next item, the board review of the electrical residential provision for 2021. Andy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On their July 23rd, 2020 meeting, the Electrical and Elevator Board approved the 2021 Oregon Electrical Specialty Code, which included low-rise residential electrical provisions. The Electrical and Elevator Board recommends the Residential Manufactured Structured Board approve the provisions that relate to low-rise electrical.
Mr. Chairman. If I can jump in here and just provide a little bit more context.
Tony, I think you are on mute, isn't it?
Am I? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. So just to kind of give a little bit more background and context, a reminder of this. So this board maintains purview over all elements of low-rise residential construction. And as a reminder, that definition, low-rise dwellings are defined by ORS 455 as residential dwellings that are 3 stories or less above grade and have an exterior door for each dwelling unit. As Andy mentioned and as captured in the memo for this item, these provisions are administered through the Oregon Electrical Specialty Code, and the Electrical Advisory Board has already approved and recommended these provisions for the upcoming iteration of their code, the 2021 OESC. The document in front of you, it's like a matrix document that you're probably familiar with. It summarizes these provisions that relate to low-rise dwellings, and our electrical chief, Keith Anderson, is available if there are technical questions. Thank you.
Any discussion or question to the city staff? No? Okay, we have 3 options here. Motion to approve as a proposal, or motion to approve with amendment, or motion to disapprove the proposal.
This is Eli Vollum. Upon recommendation of the Electrical and Elevator Board, I make the motion that we approve the Electrical and Elevator Board's recommendation to adopt the proposed low-rise residential electrical provisions and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption, with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Please call the roll call for vote, please.
Eli Vollum,
Yes, approved.
Rich Tover,
Approve.
Doug Lethine, Emily Kemper,
Yes.
Rich Fry,
Yes.
John Camiller,
Yes.
Gordon Anslow,
Approve.
Chair Rebbe Tamerhalet.
Approved.
Motion passes 7
Thank
to
you.
0.
Thanks. Last item is the review and the low-rise provision for 2021. Andy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to sound a little familiar. The State Plumbing Board approved what was then the 2020 Oregon Plumbing Specialty Code at its February 27th, 2020 meeting. The adoption of that code then got pushed to 2021, so it is now the 2021 Oregon Plumbing Specialty Code. It includes low-rise residential plumbing provisions, and the Plumbing Board recommends that the Residential Manufactured Structures Board approve the provisions that relate to low-rise residential plumbing. There is a matrix in your packet outlining those changes, and I believe Andy Skinner is here to answer any questions, should you have them.
Tony available for any discussion? Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have anything to add, but if the board has any questions of me, I'll probably defer to the plumbing chief who's in the room. Thank you.
Okay, any discussion on the floor, or we just have to have three motions, either to approve or approve with amendment or disapprove, so. It's, if there is no discussion or comments, we just have a motion now.
This is Gordon. I'll make a motion to approve the State Plumbing Board's recommendation to adopt the proposed low-rise residential plumbing provisions and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption, with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants of the public or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
This is Rich. I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Whatever.
There is none. Go ahead and call for the vote, please.
Eli Volum,
Approve.
Rich Tover,
Approve.
Emily Kemper,
Yes, approve.
Rich Fry,
Approve.
John Camiller,
Approve.
Gordon Anslow,
Approve.
Chair Rebbe Tamerhalet.
Approve.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item is announcement. There's none. Last item is adjournment. Is there any more discussion? There's none. I think I'm gonna, there is no further business. I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting, and it's 11:46 a.m.